welcome back to Storytime with Dave Booker. Today we're going to continue on with the next chapter in Sheriff in a Small Town. This book right here, which you can get on Amazon, Smashwords, and wherever fine books are sold. So, anyways, we're on the second chapter. Did you hear that? So, let's get right into it. Rocky was seated behind his desk, his hat pushed back, as became a newsman of his caliber. He finished off the last sentence in his report regarding the trial of Sheriff Joe Lester and Betty Stegler. Dropping it into the ready bin, he looked at the board for anything of interest. The phones were quiet, and it seemed as if news in this small backwater town was on holiday. He dropped in the editor's office, announcing he was going to walk around and see if he could dig up a story somewhere. Out on the street, he buttoned up his pea coat and lit his pipe in the shelter of the doorframe. He prowled the streets like a bloodhound, his rapid puffs making a trail drifting off behind him. Reckoning that a diner might hold some promise, he dropped into the Cup of Joe on Market Street. The coffee was worthy of the name, and he might hear something in the crowded diner to get him a lead on a story. Looking the place over, he chose a stool at the end of the counter. Behind him were two out-of-towners. They looked up at Rocky and promptly stopped talking. Rocky ordered a large breakfast and coffee. Once the order was placed, he slid headphones over his ears and brought out a small portable radio. He rocked gently to whatever he was listening to, his mouth forming words to a song. After a look at Rocky, the two men felt comfortable talking again, assuming he probably couldn't hear them. Rocky had them fooled, though. He hadn't turned the radio on. Acting as if he was listening to music, Rocky relaxed and ate his breakfast. Behind him, the men recommenced their conversation. "Roy, I don't know if we should get rid of this one here." The man addressed as Roy looked astonished. "Well, heck not. Plenty of places around, small town with only a sheriff and maybe a deputy at most. We get rid of this one here and our problems are solved. Sal will let us know where to pick up the next one through the usual channels. Look, Tom, we've already had to hold on to it longer than expected. Now the body is starting to deteriorate and fluids are coming out. Smells terrible. We're not going to be able to hide things much longer. We get rid of it quick, then beat hell out of town. We do it right, nobody will know anything until we're home and dry." Tom didn't look completely convinced, but shrugged and gulped his coffee. Finishing his breakfast, Rocky thought about the possibilities of their conversation. It sounded as if they were gangsters dropping off a body and hoping no one would find it. He looked at the silver napkin holder and adjusted it slightly to get a better look at the men. Both had a hardened look about them, though Roy seemed to be the more astute as well as being smoother. He contemplated following them himself. He considered himself brave enough, but not stupid enough. Rocky finished up and headed over to the sheriff's house. Leave it to the professionals. He wanted to discuss what he had heard with him. Agnes opened the door with a warm smile. As a close friend, she was always ready to welcome Rocky. Granted, she was sometimes perturbed when he wanted to see her father rather than her. She recognized by the look on his face that he had come to see the sheriff out of her father. Escorting Rocky to a chair at the kitchen table across from the sheriff, she placed a large breakfast and coffee in front of him. He looked at Agnes in alarm, but the warm, sweet smile and the hand on his arm were eloquent. He'd have to eat a second breakfast and drink his 8th cup of coffee. Hold on one second. I need something to keep my throat going. I want to be careful I don't show whose this is. I'm not getting sponsored, so they don't get airtime. As they ate, Rocky explained what he'd heard and thought about it. Sheriff Morgan put his cup down and considered what Rocky had said. "I'm surprised you heard them unless you were close by. Even then, you'd have thought they'd have kept their voices down." Rocky pulled out his radio and headphones. "I had these on my ears and didn't put the radio on. They figured I couldn't hear them, so they kept on with their conversation." Morgan playfully punched Rocky on the shoulder. "Excellent thinking." He got up and strolled to the front room phone. "Cooper, you got something on right now?" "Good. I want you to take the car and look for two men. They look like out-of-towners in black suits and fedora hats. Find out what they're up to. Sonsitter thought, bring the car here and pick me up. I don't like the sound of this. Well, okay, but I'll have the radio on here in case you need backup. You go careful. Here? He came back into the kitchen and recommenced his breakfast, but with his mind elsewhere. Agnes reached over and turned on the radio. Leaning on Rocky's back, she whispered in his ear. Morgan looked up when Rocky finally let out a snicker, spilled some coffee. He opened his mouth to say something, but was stopped by a squelch from the radio. Found them, Sheriff. They're selling a used auto. They sold it to Mrs. Murphy on Arnold Street. Everything seems okay. I did a quick check of the car, and it's a bit beat up, but runs okay. I don't see anything we need to hold them on. Sheriff Morgan had Cooper head back to the office. Looks like a bum steer. Seems like they were just out here selling. Guess they figured a small town would be easier to sell a beat-up junker than in the city. Mrs. Murphy dropped by to show Agnes her new car. She called in through the screen door before opening it and letting herself in. Agnes, I finally got a car. Now you won't have to pick me up for church in the police car. You know, it never did look good having the police car outside so often. She giggled into her hands. Folks were getting the idea I was doing something I shouldn't. Agnes went out with Rocky accompanying. He looked the vehicle over, under, and inside and decided it was a decent car for short house, even if it was dented and a little rusted. Then he got to the rear, though. He wrinkled up his nose. Good Lord, there's a god-awful stink coming from back here. Mrs. Murphy nodded knowingly. Yeah, they explained that. They used the car for carrying deer back from a hunting trip. They had a small one in it and forgot about it. The smell should go away after a few days. Shoving the truck, which was empty, but gave off the lingering smell of putrefaction. It assailed their nostrils and made them gag. Rocky pulled out a handkerchief and covered the mouth and nose. He rummaged around in the trunk, running his hand around and lifting the carpet and wood underneath to take a look at the spare tire well. Mrs. Murphy promptly fainted. Sheriff Morgan hurried outside at the sound of commotion. Rocky showed him the cause. In the well in the trunk was the curled up and swollen remains of someone who had died at least 5 days ago. Blood and other liquids were coming out of the mouth, nose, and ears. Morgan went inside to call the state police in on the case. He also called Cooper to come over to the house. When Cooper arrived, he was probably given a dressing down due to the shoddy inspection he claimed to have done. When showing the remains of the trunk, he turned a sickly green. The state police arrived within an hour. The remains were removed and the car impounded. Mrs. Murphy was distraught at losing her money and car all the same day. Rocky sat on the porch and wrote up his story with Agnes peering over his shoulder, making suggestions. Rocky closed his notebook so suddenly that Agnes thought she was irritating him and rose to make a hasty retreat inside. Rocky lashed out a hand, caught her wrist, and brought her back. Agnes looked over her shoulder at Mrs. Murphy as Rocky made his thoughts known. Not long after, Agnes and Rocky were seated in Ralph's Pretty Good Cars and Deals. Seated behind his desk, Ralph Sr. listened to Rocky's proposal. Such a shame. Mrs. Murphy hasn't had a lot of luck lately. Tell you what, let's take a walk outside and look over some. Agnes, you pick out the one you think she'd like, then we'll all drive it over and hand it over the keys. As they walked around, Rocky wrote his notes up for the write-up he promised regarding the sympathetic gift Ralph was giving. It was a good advertisement for Ralph and another story for Rocky. Plus, there was benefit to Mrs. Murphy. Agnes picked out a decent 1959 Buick LeSabre hardtop. It was in good condition with 70,000 miles and would last a long time if it was maintained well. Rocky thought about checking in with Joe and seeing if he'd be willing to keep an eye on it. He finished the write-up in the back seat while they drove back to Agnes's home. Sure enough, Mrs. Murphy was still there and still upset. Morgan was assuring her she would get her money returned eventually. Rocky did a quick check on his camera as Agnes leapt out of the car before Ralph had brought it to a stop. She frantically dragged Mrs. Murphy out. Ralph stood by with keys outstretched, and Rocky took pictures. Her tears flowed once more as she hugged everyone, including the couple who happened to be passing by. Before driving off, though, she did a check on the trunk and was relieved to find only a spare tire there. Sheriff Morgan praised Rocky and Agnes on their idea, then went back inside to nap. Rocky suggested a light lunch somewhere, which delighted Agnes. The diner was packed. Rocky and Agnes had to squeeze in with a couple of old men having a chat over open-faced sandwiches. As they ate, they made small talk and tried to ignore the men. Ignoring them became difficult as the men began loudly debating. "I'm telling you, Fred, it was a slong." He held his hands approximately 6 inches apart. Fred scoffed, and putting down his coffee, he held his hands about 3 inches apart. "And I say it was only this big, Bob. I don't know, I saw it when it was in his hands." Fred bit into the sandwich and spoke while still chewing. "Well, it only looked that small because Hank's got big hands." He pulled the picture out of his shirt pocket and shoved it before his friend's face. "Look down at his belt buckle and you'll see how big it was. Sam's right down there wrapped around it." Agnes choked on her mashed potatoes. Rocky was about to try and get the men to stop talking, but Agnes was soundly laughing and shaking her head. She went white, though, then a deep red, when Bob pulled the picture back and put it before her. "Look at this here. Tell me how big you think that is." Rocky's hand leapt across, grabbing the picture, and was about to rip it up when his eye was caught by the view. Laughing, he handed it back to the man, who again showed it to Agnes. Blushing, she looked to see a man in waders, and in his lowered hand was a small fish. Finishing their lunch, they took a walk to the park and sat for a while. The only other occupants were 2 boys in the sandbox. Over the peace and quiet, they heard them talking. "I heard your dad beat you again yesterday." The boy he was speaking to shrugged. Yeah, but he usually beats me a couple of times a week." The first boy looked up concerned. "You want I should help you?" The other boy shrugged again. "It won't make a difference." Rocky looked over concerned. Agnes was listening as well, but didn't seem to consider the problem. He considered that odd, knowing her heart. One of the boys pointed down the street. "Your dad's coming." The boy looked over and saw a tall man carrying a wooden box. He was walking quickly towards the park. The boy looked up and brushed himself off as he stood. "Well, time for another beating." He passed by Rocky and was halted by his outstretched hand. "Hey, look, kid. I'm friends with the sheriff. If your dad's beating you, I can get you help." The child pulled his arm away and ran towards the approaching man. Rocky and Agnes could see him pointing and gesturing towards them. The man approached with long strides, and Rocky rose to meet him. The man stopped about a yard away, looking at Rocky speculatively. "Here you threatened to go to the sheriff and complain about I'm beating my son." Rocky came a step closer. "You think beating him is right?" The man shrugged, which made Rocky start to burn. Only Agnes's hand on his arm prevented him from taking a more active stance. The man bent forward the box. "Look, I'm just teaching the kid chess. He's good, but I'm not just going to let him win. If he wins, he's earned it. Can't see why a sheriff should have anything to say about it." Rocky stammered out an apology and sat down next to Agnes, who was shaking with laughter. Moments later, the sheriff's car approached. Parking outside the gate, Sheriff Morgan got out and sat on the bench next to them. "Well, Rocky, it's a good thing you kept your wits about you. I got a feeling you were tempted to follow those 2 around and see what they were up to for yourself." He pulled the facts from his pocket. "Those 2 were bad news." He looked up from his notes. "You ever hear of a gangster named Frank Marie?" Rocky nodded. Who hadn't? Apparently they were 2 of his group's delivery boys. What the hell they thought they were doing, I hadn't a clue. They were supposed to just dump the body somewhere and scoot. Instead, they picked up the body in a stolen vehicle. They'd been driving around for a few days. It seemed they forgot it was back there until it started to smell. Then they figured they could dump the whole thing and make a couple of bucks at the same time. Rocky shook his head. This was the type of people organized crime was recruiting nowadays, and crime should be wiped out within a month. Agnes kissed Rocky goodbye and got into the squad car with her father. Rocky headed back to the paper and put in his stories. On the way, he stopped at the jeweler's for a ring. He was feeling it was about time to solidify things between Agnes and himself. So the next thing is cold cases. I'm going to check. I think we've already done this. I'll check through the files. If it is, I'll put it down so that this is chapter 3, 1 and 2, or however I have it. So we may go to chapter 4, which is flame rekindled. So I will go through, find out where we stand, and then we'll do another reading in a day or two. So appreciate you being here. Look forward to seeing you. I hope you're enjoying these. If you are, put comments in the comments section. Let me know. If you don't like them, let me know. Just be nice. Constructive criticism is always appreciated. Well, I guess that's it. Have a good day. Take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you again.